Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time zone you're in. Welcome into Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the latest mission from Starbase, Texas. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. So good to be with you here on this Monday, October 13th. We are broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, bringing you live views in part from our friends at Lab Padre, as well as from our friend Pete Karstens with MaxQ Productions, who, happy to say, is going to be experiencing his first Starship launch in person, and we're very glad that he's able to be down at Starbase with some stellar views of the rocket and some nice water in the foreground. As you can see in the upper right-hand corner, we are currently T-minus 1 hour, 56 minutes, 27 seconds and counting to the planned liftoff of this Starship Super Heavy integrated rocket. Of course, this being a Starship launch day would only be fitting that SpaceX is not only counting down to a liftoff from Texas, but also right here in the Sunshine State of Florida. Swinging camera views over to Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We are also tracking the long-delayed and hopefully getting ready to launch here in the next little bit Kuiper mission with 24 of Amazon's Project Kuiper satellites on board. This is also a finale of sorts, as we'll talk more about with the Starship launch. Here at Pad 40, this is the third and final booked launch that Amazon purchased to fly its Kuiper satellites into low Earth orbit. Now, given that these two missions are going to be overlapping in timeline and liftoff, with the Kuiper mission set to fly from Pad 40 at 8:08 p.m. Eastern, as things are currently situated, and Starship set to lift off at 7:15 p.m. Eastern from Starbase in Texas. We're going to do kind of what we normally do, but a little bit modified. We will have a dedicated Kuiper stream, but with fairly light commentary. But we will have that dedicated launch coverage for you in a separate stream. So if you want to open up dual boxes once we start that coverage, that's a good way you'll be able to keep track of what's happening on both the Starship side of things as well as the Kuiper countdown. We'll be starting that Kuiper pre-launch coverage beginning at about 7:08 p.m. Eastern, 23:08 UTC, or roughly a T-minus 1 hour prior to liftoff. I say it that way because there is a launch window for the Kuiper mission, and they could push back into today's opportunity. Last little note about the Kuiper mission, SpaceX is also watching the booster recovery area, as noted by the 45th Weather Squadron. It's currently described as a moderate risk for this launch from Florida on a scale of low to moderate to high. So we'll be keeping close eyes on the Kuiper mission from here in Florida and keep you apprised if there are further launch delays, whether further into the window or perhaps delaying a day. Last little note on the weather: if they do slip 24 hours, the launch weather outlook as forecast on Sunday, that launch opportunity on Tuesday has the same weather forecast of a 95% favorable at the pad, moderate risk conditions for the drone ship. So with all that out of the way, all of that preamble, let's bring things back to the first up to bat mission. This is SpaceX's Starship and Super Heavy rocket, standing more than 400 feet tall at Pad A. I mentioned this is a mission that has a number of lasts on its name as well. This is the final flight of this version of both the Starship upper stage and the Super Heavy booster flying down below. That booster, tail number B-15, having flown first on the Starship Flight 8 mission, is making its second and final launch coming up here in as soon as an hour and 52 minutes. This is also the last time that SpaceX will use Pad A, the launch tower and orbital launch mount, in this current configuration. SpaceX will soon be moving over to Launch Pad B, which you can see in Pete's wide shot here. That is the tower, of course, that doesn't have a rocket standing, getting ready to lift off. That'll be the first launch of a version 3 rocket. There's a lot to talk about with this mission and the transition to the next iteration of Starship, the next iteration of the launch tower. And fortunately, we are joined by a regular around these parts, if you will. He's kind enough to join us back at his old stomping grounds once again. Currently a space reporter with Ars Technica, a former editor here at Spaceflight now. We're joined by Mr. Stephen Clark. Stephen, how are you, my friend?
Doing fine, Will. How are you?
I'm doing fine. It's a good day to fly a rocket, it seems. Hopefully we get 2 of them.
Yes. The weather down in South Texas looks great. Unfortunately, I'm not there for this particular one. I wish I was, but yeah, everything looks good weather-wise from all accounts. So hopefully this thing flies.
Fingers crossed. One thing, just a note for our audience as we get started here as well. SpaceX opted to not do a wet dress rehearsal of the fully integrated rocket stack, as they opted not to for Flight 10. There ended up being a ground systems issue that they ran into with the first launch attempt, and then there was a weather delay before they finally got that rocket off the pad. Stephen, as we open up our conversation about Starship, do you think it's a sign of their confidence in the flow of at least the tanking side of things, that they are satisfied with the fueling that they've done in order to do the static fire tests of both the Super Heavy booster and the ship upper stage, that they are cruising on past wet dress rehearsal as they do now for basically every Falcon 9 launch?
Yeah. I suppose so, Will. I think that this is the 11th flight of Starship from this particular launch pad, as you mentioned in the introduction, and not doing a wet dress rehearsal shaves a day or 2 off of the launch campaign, so that helps bring the schedule in tighter and shortens the time between flights. So if they have the confidence to do so, it seems like a smart move. You did mention that the ground system issue that they saw on the first launch attempt back in August of Flight 10. So we'll see if anything crops up on this countdown today. Similarly, I suspect when they move over to the other launch pad, they will probably want to do a wet dress rehearsal over there before the first flight of version 3, but we'll see.
We shall see indeed. So for those of you who've read our pre-launch coverage or hopped over to Ars Technica to read Stephen's pre-launch article, you know that this mission, as far as the timing of the events, both leading up to and through the flight, it's essentially a wash, rinse, repeat of a lot of things from Flight 10, but it's not exactly a full one-to-one. Skipping ahead a little bit in the timeline of things, Stephen, jumping to one of the final milestones was something that you keyed into in your pre-launch article, which is the banking maneuver that Ship 38 is going to be performing before it makes its splashdown in the Indian Ocean. Something that is a precursor for missions returning back to Starbase. What are you going to be watching mostly with that banking maneuver, given that we haven't seen that specifically before?
Well, first and foremost, just a curiosity, because I'm not really sure exactly what that will entail and how steep or how strong that banking maneuver will be. What's the amplitude of that maneuver, and how they'll do it. So I'm curious to see at what point that occurs during the descent. I presume, although I don't know, it may be during the belly flop phase of the flight. Yeah, just kind of curious to see how everything works out with that maneuver. And the other thing that's really the only other really thing that's different on this particular flight in terms of the timing and objectives is with the Super Heavy booster, they're going to be going from 13 engines down to 5 engines, and then down to 3 engines on the landing burn of the Super Heavy booster. So that intermediate stage of 5 engines is something they'll be doing on the next generation Starship, and they'll be testing that today as well as the booster makes its way to a water landing in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, I'm sure some sentimentalists would have loved to have seen SpaceX try to recapture B-15 and put it over in the rocket garden for posterity. But of course, SpaceX slightly less sentimental in wanting to continue to press on with future versions of the Super Heavy booster, and so this will be the final voyage for that particular part of the rocket. Well, both stages of the rocket, of course.
Yep, exactly. And we may talk about this later on in more detail, but the other change that comes to mind is on this flight, we don't expect to see that orange hue on the skin of Starship when it comes into the Indian Ocean for splashdown. That was caused by some oxidation of metallic tiles on the last flight, Flight 10, and had this really distinctive color. If some of our viewers are familiar with that, if they watch Flight 10, we don't expect to see that today because my understanding is there are no metallic tiles on this flight. At least that was the plan as of a few weeks ago. So we expect to see just a silver and black ship come in, maybe with a few scorch marks, if everything goes according to plan.
Yeah, since they're adding more of the crunch wrap basically everywhere is what Bill Gerstenmaier, the Vice President of Build and Flight Reliability, mentioned during his talk in front of the American Astronautical Society last month.
Mm-hmm.
So it should be a fairly clean ship from the buoy camera stationed off the coast of Australia today. Of course, assuming that the banking maneuver is not too aggressive and we see a premature end to ship 38 before it reaches that point. But like you said, we don't exactly know where specifically along the trajectory it might happen. So we'll just have to wait and see what kind of exciting ending, as SpaceX likes to say, that we'll actually get at the tail end of all this.
Yep, they always promised an exciting landing, so they've all been exciting one way or the other. So we'll see how today's turns out.
Perhaps it's just a happenstance, but certainly worth noting as we are getting ready to see SpaceX hopefully launch this final iteration of Starship and Super Heavy, that it was exactly 1 year ago today, Stephen, that you and I were both down at Starbase for a pretty momentous occasion, the first catch of the Starship, or the Super Heavy booster. Go to some video of the liftoff, and eventually we'll see the landing as well. But Stephen, it's been a year since you and I got to see this in person. Your thoughts on the intervening year for SpaceX and the Starship program?
Yeah, this was 1 year ago. I remember it very well. One of the more spectacular things I've seen in my career was this, not just the launch, but the landing or the catch, which we'll see, I guess, in a moment. And in that 1 year, I've obviously the last 12 months have been kind of touch and go for Starship. The following flight was fairly successful last November, and then they had three successive in-flight failures and then a ground failure of a Starship during a test that exploded in June. So the first half of 2025 really did not go well for SpaceX and the Starship program, at least. And we'll see Flight 10 put them back on track, and hopefully they'll continue that trajectory on Flight 11. But yeah, spectacular video here. I remember this well. Really surreal moment.
Yeah, and that sonic boom certainly caught me off guard. I mean, you and I have had our fair share of experiencing sonic booms with Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy side booster recoveries here at the Cape, but that was certainly something to behold. I kind of wish I brought some earplugs that day, truth be told.
Yeah, just an incredible sight. Couldn't have asked for better weather that morning as well. This was the last Starship launch that was in the morning, correct?
Yes, then yeah, I believe it was Flight 6 when they punted to the evening launches,
Mm-hmm.
and they've been flying in the evening ever since because it was Flight 6 where we got that really nice daytime video of the ship splashdown in the Indian Ocean for the first time.
Right. Yeah, I remember that too.
So as you just laid out, I mean, Block 2 of Starship, which obviously we're watching Block 1 now, the penultimate flight of that iteration of the rocket, it faced maybe quite a bit more challenges than I think SpaceX and the engineers were anticipating, perhaps. Um, Not having been in the room, of course, but just your assessment of how this latest chapter with version 2, block 2, however you want to term it and think of it, how much of a setback do you think this past year has been for the Starship program since, when we were talking during this flight, you and I were both reporting that they were hoping to start launching version 3 this year.
Exactly, and then they were also hoping to complete or attempt at least the first in-flight refueling demonstration by the end of this year. And now it's probably in the second half of next year at the earliest. It would be what I'm hearing for that attempt. So don't know how much of that delay is directly attributable to the version 2 issues, because the in-flight refueling demonstration has its own set of technical challenges that they might not have been ready for anyway by now. But certainly, the first 6 months of the year have been, uh, they learned a lot. I think SpaceX engineers would tell you that they are smarter about how the vehicle flies than they were a year ago. They've learned a lot about the Raptor engines and the propulsion system. And finally, on the last flight, they learned a lot about the heat shield. That's the data they were really aiming to get back in January. And then finally, at the end of August, they got that in hand and learned that the metallic tiles, for example, don't work all that well. So it would have been nice for SpaceX to have known that in January, but they had these launch failures in January and March, and then another failure in flight in May, and then the ground test failure during a static fire attempt in June down in Starbase, Texas. So just if you do the math, they would have liked to have had the heat shield information 7 months earlier. That could have helped them kind of down select a design for the heat shield as they go forward. But hopefully they've learned what not to do on Starship version 3 from what they experienced earlier this year with version 2.
Yeah, just speaking to version 3, one second, we're just queuing up a little visual aid here. Taking a look at an animation that was shared back in the May time frame after Flight 8, I believe this was, when Elon gave the presentation at Starbase, showing off some slides and some more information about version 3 of the Starship Super Heavy stack. Obviously, this is just an animation, but this is what the first flight from Pad B will look like. There's an animated version of it beneath the ship upper stage. Obviously, one of the biggest changes between the Pad A current configuration and what's happening over at Pad B is that it'll have a more traditional flame trench, which, of course, they've found a way to mitigate the impacts of the Flight 1 issues. Of course, that was, seems like almost a lifetime ago with the Starship program, now that they've got the water deluge system and the cool plate. But given that they are hoping for an increased performance with version 3 Raptor engines, Stephen, how important is it that they factor in a more traditional style of flame trench into the Pad B design?
Yeah, I think that was another lesson that SpaceX learned with version 1 of Starship is, there was a lot of second guessing, if my memory serves, back in 2022, 2023, about why aren't they using a flame trench on Pad A. Well, on the first flight, we obviously saw that damage. That big hole excavated, dug out from underneath the launch mount that they had to repair and modify to go forward with Flight 2 and all the subsequent flights. So I think even Elon Musk has said that that was a lesson learned, that they should have used the flame trench, and it's part of iterative design. So they're moving forward with the second launch pad with the flame trench, and we'll see how that works on the next flight after this.
Yeah, and it was actually your question to Bill Gerstenmaier that got us a little bit more information about the timing of things, that they're looking to fly the first version 3 rocket sometime early next year, and the first orbital flight won't happen until at least Flight 13. I guess question you on that, we're maybe surprised or kind of expecting them to hop into an orbital configuration as soon as the flight after this? Or do you think that they may need to take more time getting some of the learnings from version 3 before they try to take it orbital?
Not terribly surprised that they're going to take it a little bit slower and try to do another suborbital flight with version 3 before going orbital. Despite the culture of SpaceX, on that is popular in the public, and some of it's true, is they take risks and they move fast, and of course all that's true. But with Starship, we've seen them actually take a pretty methodical approach, in my opinion, with all these flight tests. Testing something, going a little further on the next flight. Nothing really, apart from Flight 1, has been that big of a leap. They tested the ability for Super Heavy to guide itself to a controlled splashdown in the ocean before they brought it back to Starbase. They're now doing that multiple times with the ship to try to get it to a controlled splashdown before they bring it back to Starbase, which will be a much harder and more difficult technical task than just bringing back Super Heavy from the upper atmosphere. You're actually bringing Starship back from orbit. So it's not really surprising. And if something, goes wrong today or goes wrong on the first flight of version 3, I expect them, to that first orbital flight will be pushed out progressively if something happens.
Yeah, I think obviously they've got some key data back on how to responsibly operate Starship on orbit, having now completed a couple in-space Raptor relights. That's one of the test objectives that they're going to be looking towards today after the deployment of 8 more of the Starlink simulator satellites, or basically those big metal frames. They're not quite satellites since they have no operational capabilities, and they'll, like the ship upper stage itself, fly a suborbital path and also splash down in the Indian Ocean, so they will not be left to become debris.
No, they do not want a ship stuck in orbit. That would be very bad.
Very, very bad indeed. Well, while we've been talking about the action that's happening down at Starbase for good reason, as SpaceX is now just a little more than an hour and a half away from the planned liftoff, there's, of course, as you alluded to, Stephen, activity happening over at Pad 39A to prepare for the next launch, or the first launch, I should say, from here in Florida of Starbase. Let's go out live now. You can see that tower continuing to take shape, and you can actually just, starting to see over the mound there that leads up the ramp for the Falcon 9 rocket from the hangar on the right-hand side of the box to the left where the pad is, and the transporter erector currently sitting and waiting for its next use case. But you can just barely make out the base of what we believe is the top of the launch mount for future Starship rockets that'll fly from here. Lots of activity happening, and of course, a little bit further away, also at Pad 39A, they're looking at adding a couple of landing zones for future returns of Falcon Heavy rockets, since by the end of this year, SpaceX's lease out at Landing Zone 1 and Landing Zone 2 will have expired, and the Space Force is not renewing it. Turning our eyes elsewhere here in Florida, popping over down the road, you can see some of the progress happening over near the Hangar X site, where SpaceX refurbishes the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy side boosters as well. Just over the tree line there, sort of in the left third of the screen, if you sort of think of the big box split into thirds, and the leftmost third, like right on that line, you can see a little bit of white scaffolding. That's the beginnings of the forthcoming Mega Bay that will help, of course, SpaceX operations when it comes to the Starship and Super Heavy rockets that will fly here from not only Pad 39A, but of course down at Slick 37. So quite a bit happening here in Florida, and of course off cam, but SpaceX also working towards the turnover of Space Launch Complex 37 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where they will be building a couple of Starship towers. Just bringing in a visual aid for Pad 37, since we don't have a good camera view for that location. Here's a look at an animated rendering of how SpaceX imagines Slick 37 will look in the future with those two Starship towers. Of course, SpaceX looking for a fairly high launch cadence between both Pad 37 and 39A for the Starship program, which is, as Stephen, you mentioned, what they're going to need in order to create an operational cadence to launch missions, both for moon-bound operations for the Artemis program and eventually SpaceX's main aspiration, sending cargo and someday people to Mars.
Yeah, they're going to need a lot of launch pads, and we see these two over at Complex 37, and they have a couple at Starbase, also Pad 39A, and we saw where SpaceX is building the new Mega Bay over at Roberts Road at Kennedy Space Center, and that's going to come online. Not sure when. You may have a better idea of that since you're local, Will. But before it comes online, SpaceX wants to actually start launching Starships from Florida even before they complete that assembly, the factory rather, at Kennedy Space Center. So they're going to be transporting Starships and boosters, I presume, from South Texas, from Starbase, across the Gulf to Florida by boat horizontally, and then assembling them vertically, once they get to Florida Space Coast, and preparing them for launch. So quite a logistics challenge for SpaceX to manage flight hardware coming from one place to another to different launch pads. SpaceX, their ethos with Starship is to build them where they launch them, because they don't want to be shipping these vehicles any longer than they have to across the ocean. So, but to enable a higher flight rate sooner, they're going to have to be moving these things across from one state to another. And they need all these launch pads, because in order to refuel Starship for the missions out to the moon or to Mars or really anywhere else beyond low Earth orbit, they're going to need to launch a lot of missions in fairly rapid succession, a dozen or more perhaps refueling tankers over the course of, we don't have hard numbers on this, but a few weeks to maybe a month or two. And that's not quite the flight rate of what Falcon 9 does today, but it's pretty close. And so, in order to enable something like an Artemis mission to the moon with a lander that's based on Starship, or a flight out to Mars, SpaceX is going to have to be launching Starships almost as often as they do Falcon 9s today.
Which, as we've heard from SpaceX, they want to try to minimize the impact to the other launch providers here in Florida for that rapid Starship launch cadence, but that'll, of course, depend on how quickly they can start to pare down those safety radiuses when it comes to fueling and static fire tests, and of course launch itself, since folks that are neighbors to SpaceX, like Blue Origin, like ULA, there are certain launch and other operations at their respective pads that can't be done if they're within the danger keep out zone for Starship launch operations. So, it's going to be quite an interesting song and dance when the Starship program becomes operational here in Florida. One thing worth noting, though, at the recent the 7th annual Space Coast Symposium that Kiko Donchev with SpaceX mentioned, is that they are not going to start launching Starship from here until they've got a good handle on the rocket and they feel more assured about the operations of the V3 iteration of Starship. So, given that, it's going to be an interesting race to see which is ready first, the Giga Bay or the actual Starship rocket for launches from here in Florida. I think a lot will depend on some of those early flights from Starbase and how those go and are perceived, and if they're trying to get into somewhat of a more operational flow from Starbase before they even introduce the first flight from here in Florida. I think it's going to be a bit of a waiting game for a while here. I'd probably peg it at least the back half of 2026, but maybe that's a little bit too long of a lead time for SpaceX's ramp up here. It's hard to say with absolute certainty.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, it's hard to say. They have a lot to do. That goes without saying, to get these launch pads active, to get all the logistics trained in order to be able to, ship, I guess, in order to be able to ship the vehicles from Texas to Florida, building out the Mega Bay there in Florida at Kennedy Space Center, bringing on the second launch pad in Texas. Still a lot on their plate, and this will take some time. I think. I don't know if I would put any date on it, other than to say that this is a lot of work, and it's going to be a number of months or even a years before, in my view, before we see Starship flying from Florida. But again, it's really hard to say. There are things going on behind the scenes that we are not exposed to and don't have a lot of knowledge of, unfortunately. But just looking at the volume of work, it's hard to see them launching Starship, in my opinion, launching Starship from Florida next year.
Yeah, I imagine that would be the internal hope, but as you say, there's still quite a bit to do before that's even within the realm of practicality. We're just looking now at a rendering of the aforementioned Giga Bay that we've been talking about. Figured be good to give you a visual aid since we saw the live pictures a little bit earlier. This is a graphical representation of what SpaceX imagines it will look like, and we'll see once it's all said and done what it actually looks like. But it will be quite sizable, so it should be visible to folks not just that are traveling State Road 3 up to the Saturn Causeway, but also from offsite. But certainly if you're taking one of the bus tours out at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, once the Giga Bay is up and running, it will very much be a notable landmark that the bus tour won't stop at, but it'll be hard to miss as you're driving up the road to the Apollo Center. Well, we are currently T-minus 1 hour, 22 minutes, 11 seconds, and counting to the planned liftoff of Starship. Before we get too much further, want to take a second to thank our team that's been in place for this live coverage as we're hopefully getting ready to see the launch of this massive rocket from Starbase, Texas. Of course, at the beginning of the broadcast, I mentioned our friend Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions is down there presently. You're taking a live look at his vantage point right now. Also see some live views from our friends over at Lab Padre. Behind the scenes, we've got Stephen Young, our Spaceflight Now editor, alongside photographer John Pisani, helping to run the technical operations of the broadcast, as well as our Adam Bernstein, who brought us that camera view from the Hangar X site along Roberts Road and has already got the camera set up for coverage of the Kuiper mission, which is currently set to launch later this evening. A lot of things will depend on whether or not this pans out or not, but given the timing of liftoff and the trajectory of the Starship rocket, there is a chance, and I'll throw the biggest asterisk up on that, there's a chance that we may be able to catch the Starship rocket as it's making its pass south of Florida. So we'll have our tracking cameras at the ready, and if we are able to see it from here, we'll of course bring you those live pictures, but just want to throw that out as a potential visual that may be coming a little bit further down the pipe. I also want to thank our moderators who've been helping us out in the live chat today. Big thanks to Rick Donner and Jeff Hansen for holding it down in the live chat. You can help make their job that much easier just by following the rules of the live chat. We ask that you converse in English so that our mods can respond as appropriate. Also, that you refrain from using all caps. Emojis are perfectly fine, but we just ask that you don't create a large block of them that takes up several lines so that other people can see their messages and share their thoughts about this mission or other goings-on in the realm of space or spaceflight. We also ask that you hold off from delving into overt politics and religion. And last but certainly not least, that you treat each other with the kindness and respect that you yourself would like to be treated with. We'll all get along swimmingly. Also helping us today is channel member Cumulus Granatus, who's helping out by answering folks' questions in the live chat as they come up. Last little bit of channel housekeeping. If I want to give a shout to our channel member community, broadly speaking, who help support this and all of our other live launch opportunities. So thanks to folks like Anita Brookhands, to Deb, to Jim Fowley, Sulfur for Lunch, Tobe Wobe, and many, many others. Cappy Cross, hello to you. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, which is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in Florida in 4K. To that end, I want to welcome a new channel member, Don Ski, joining us with channel membership at the pad leader level. Sulfur for Lunch has been a member with us at the mission specialist level for 14 months. Says another month, and hopefully many more to come. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings-on in the realm of space or spaceflight, you can follow the lead of folks like Chuck Close and Jeff Hansen by using the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will it be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we cruise on through the count, but you'll also be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now. And that, my friends, is always greatly appreciated. So thanks to Chuck for the Super Chat. Really appreciate it. And Jeff saying, go Starbase, go SpaceX, go Starship, Godspeed S38 and B15. The tail numbers for the ship upper stage and the Super Heavy booster. We're currently just about 1 hour, 17 minutes, 15 seconds, and counting before the flight of this rocket. We are coming up to our first milestone in the countdown, so let's take a spin and let you know what's on the docket before we see a good liftoff of this Starship Super Heavy. About an hour 15 out is when the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of prop load. A little bit different from Flight 10, where last time they started with the liquid oxygen on board the rocket's upper stage. This time they're going back to a previous fueling timeline as far as the sequence of events, beginning with the fuel for the upper stage. Starts at T-minus 53 minutes, followed by LOX load at T-minus 46 minutes and 10 seconds. Just about 5 minutes after that, they'll start to load the fuel, that liquid methane, on board the Super Heavy booster, followed by liquid oxygen on board B15-2 at about T-minus 35 minutes and 52 seconds. The chill down of the Raptor engines for both the booster and the ship begins at T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds. Similar to the engine chill sequence for a Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy rocket, this will thermally condition those engines ahead of their initial ignition. Moving right along, tanking will continue until about T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds when ship prop load wraps up. Booster prop loading will conclude about 30 seconds after that. 30 seconds before liftoff, the SpaceX launch director will verify that they are in fact go for launch. The flame deflector will be activated 10 seconds before liftoff. Worth noting that SpaceX does have the ability to hold the count once they reach the T-minus 40-second mark and recycle as needed. But once the flame deflector is activated and the water deluge system kicks on, if SpaceX were to run into an issue either with weather, which is highly unlikely given conditions, it would appear, or from a technical issue, whether it's ground side or with the rocket itself, it would require a stand down of at least 24 hours before SpaceX would be ready to try again, since they would have to load back up the flame deflector system with the needed amount of water. T-minus 3 seconds is when the Raptor engine ignition sequence begins. And once we hit T0, as SpaceX likes to say, excitement guaranteed. This go round, we should see those 33 Raptor engines, 24 of which are being reflown, roar to life, and this rocket will slowly but surely lift off the pad and begin the final flight for a Block 2 Starship. Just under 1 hour, 13 minutes to the planned liftoff of the Starship Super Heavy rocket. Just as a quick aside, SpaceX at this point in time still counting down towards the flight of their Falcon 9 rocket from over at Pad 40, with just about 2 hours and 5 minutes on the clock before liftoff of that mission from here in Florida. before we go ahead and bring our friend and fellow space reporter Stephen Clark with Ars Technica back into the conversation, want to go to a bit of sound from a different conversation we had earlier today with Caleb Henry, who is the director of research over at Quilty Space. They actually just published their third Starlink report, which you can check out over on their website right now, and we'll go ahead and throw a link to that in the description of this video after things wrap up here. But the part of the interview that I want to go to from that conversation is concerning how Starship will factor into the picture once it starts launching operational flights and deploying the version 3 iteration of the Starlink satellites. So this is part of our conversation with Caleb Henry over at Quilty Space.
We expect 2026 to be the year of peak Falcon launches. I think SpaceX has said as much themselves that 2026 should be the year where we see that reach a high water mark before they start to shift over to Starship. And the Starship has been a gating factor, as you pointed out, for the next generation of Starlink satellites. For some time now, the rocket has yet to enter commercial service, and the demo launches that we've seen have actually put up less mass, or I should say, have had a lower lifting capacity compared to what was initially advertised and what was originally expected. So anywhere from 35 to 50 metric tons versus the 100 and eventually 200 metric tons that the vehicle was designed to fly. So our expectation is 8 Starship launches dedicated to the Starlink constellation in 2026, split with 1 to 2 in the first half of the year, followed by a pause. This is common when introducing a new generation of satellites. For any operator, you take a pause, you figure out how your new technology is working, and then you can shift into a more rapid function. So 1 or 2 in the first half of the year, followed by another half dozen in the back half. This, of course, is a bit speculative. There's a lot that could change. Any launch failures or anomalies could upset that schedule. But the V3 version of Starship is supposed to be able to lift 100 metric tons to orbit. And we see that as really unlocking the V3 version of the satellite, which is going to be heavier, which is going to have a terabit of capacity, which is just by far and away more than any other low Earth orbit satellite out there. There's your biggest geostationary satellites, which have historically been the benchmark for this kind of thing, have around a half of a terabit, 500 gigabits of capacity. And we're talking Jupiter 3 from Hughes, or the Connect satellite from Connect VHTS from Eutelsat. Viasat is soon to launch a 1 terabit geostationary satellite, which will take the record of the largest or highest network capacity satellite in the world when it launches at the end of this month. But that's one geosatellite that took something on the order of 7 years to build. It's hard to do a one-to-one comparison. Yeah, and there always could be more launch delays. That satellite has already seen significant delays, and that'll put a lot of capacity over 1/3 of the Earth. Starlink is going to be putting up these 1 terabit per second Starlink satellites, which they'll need in significantly higher number, but ultimately will just wash the world in capacity at a rate that they had set the bar previously with the V2 Mini, and they're going to reset it again with the Starlink V3.
So, Stephen, bringing you back into the conversation, your thoughts on Caleb and Quilty's sort of forecast there of on the order of 8 Starship Starlink launches in 2026, with 2/3 of them, or the majority of them, happening in the back half of the year is what they're forecasting at this point.
Yeah, I think that is probably the best case scenario if I had to make it my own assessment. Again, Caleb caveated that, I think rightfully so, with assuming there are no failures or setbacks or anything like that with the Starlink V3 or Starship V3 next year. Next year will be the year of version 3. So, I wonder how many of those missions will actually be launching Starlink satellites. I could see 8+ Starship launches next year, but some of those are going to be refueling missions. Presumably those, well, the refueling tankers won't be carrying Starlink satellites. Maybe the ship that is going to be the client, so to speak, receiving fuel could actually carry Starlink satellites. But some of these missions won't have the capacity to carry Starlinks because they have other goals in mind. And certainly, the first V3 won't be carrying real Starlink satellites, and it'll be interesting to see if they put Starlinks on the second flight that goes to orbit next year. But it's hard to say. SpaceX was targeting 25, up to 25 Starship flights this year, and they're going to end it with 5. And that in large part was due to setbacks with the 3 launches that failed earlier in the year. But even if they had gone successfully, I really don't think they would have had anywhere close to 25 launches this year, because I think there are other challenges besides in the program besides just getting version 2 to launch successfully, which they've now done. There are other things behind the scenes that we're not seeing that are testing refueling technology and propellant transfer, the thermal management that's involved with that, as well as Raptor version 3, getting that ready to go to fly on the next gen Starship. So a lot of things, a lot of moving parts. And also we have, I've seen no public reports at all of where Starlink version 3 actually is in production, on the satellite side. So, all this has to come together to make those flights happen.
Yeah, that'll be something that I'm watching out for in the broadcast today from SpaceX. They typically will have some type of programmatic, whether it's a more robust report or an overview. Last time they had a number of things that they were talking about with the overall Starlink constellation, but with the caveat, as you were alluding to, that they kind of skipped past any real updates concerning the V3 Starlink satellites, as far as what the production looks like up at Redmond, Washington, and if they've delivered any of those down to Starbase, if they've started working with the deployment mechanism, in any capacity at the Star Factory, what that timeline looks like. Hopefully there will be some nugget to latch on to there. Either that or, my hope would be that we maybe get some update on the HLS version of Starship, the human landing system that'll be needed for the Artemis program. Obviously, the propellant transfer is the main gate between where we are now and, even bringing HLS into the realm of possibility with those future launches. But, it's been a minute since we've had a real dedicated update on where things stand with the development of, any of the really particulars of the HLS Starship program, whether it's docking work with the Orion capsule for that launch, or the interior of the ship that'll actually be used for the HLS. It's been very quiet on that front, I'll say it like that.
Yeah, no mention at all from Elon Musk at the last launch when he was on the SpaceX live stream discussing, all things Starship except HLS, which is, I think, the thing that most people are most interested in hearing about. And it would be nice to get an update from SpaceX or even some direction from NASA to tell SpaceX to provide a public update. We saw those dynamics happen a few times in the Dragon development program, where NASA, had to kind of nudge SpaceX along to give some more public updates on where things stand, and it'd be nice to see that happen with HLS now. We know that Elon Musk doesn't see the Artemis program as a real high priority at SpaceX. He is primarily focused, on three things with Starship: getting the ship back to the launch site in order to enable rapid reuse, launching Starlink version 3, which will be a big moneymaker, and also getting Starship to Mars, which is the mission statement that Elon has been consistent about for more than 20 years now. So HLS is kind of an add-on for him, nice to have. And whereas for NASA and the U.S. government, it is a critical national concern, given what's going on with China and their lunar program. So, the priorities don't necessarily match up there. And Elon Musk has said publicly in his remarks earlier this year that he thinks the Artemis program is not ambitious enough, and we would like to see more emphasis on long-term presence at the moon base, which I think is in NASA's long-term goal. But you got to land there first. So I would like to hear something more concrete on HLS, because that is, I think, what those of us in the media, space enthusiasts, certainly in Congress, also wants to hear a lot about.
Yeah, this graphic that we're looking at right now is from the Starship page on SpaceX's website, where they say that they are planning cargo flights to lunar surface for research, I'm quoting them here, for research, development, and exploratory missions starting in 2028 at a rate of 100 million per metric ton, end quote, with obviously this being their main objective, with missions they say will start in 2030. Just pausing the conversation, we'll come back to this in a second, but just noting that we are approaching the 1 hour mark ahead of the flight of Starship Flight 11. You can see the venting happening there from the midsection of the tower as SpaceX is preparing to load liquid oxygen on board the ship upper stage, coming here shortly. Ship LOX load will begin in about 13 minutes, roughly T-minus 46 minutes and 10 seconds. The first part of the fueling timeline will really kick into gear at T-minus 53 minutes, assuming that SpaceX is still targeting the opening of the window. But going back to what you were just saying, Stephen, with NASA having nudged SpaceX to make some more explicit comments, I think back to, and I'm blanking on which pre-launch mission this was. I want to say it was Crew 7, Crew 8, somewhere, one of those crew missions where you had a panel that included then NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, and one of our colleagues in the press corps asked, I think it may have actually been friend Bill Harwood over at CBS, asking for more specifics from SpaceX about the number of anticipated launches that it will take for this on-orbit refueling campaign. And the answer that was given initially was somewhat opaque until Bill Nelson stepped in and asked very explicit, or said very explicitly, the question was how many, and at that point the answer was, I think, 12 to 15 was around the ballpark that was given. But it's it can be like pulling teeth at times to try to get specifics, obviously recognizing that this is a iterative development program and a lot of things will change between now and when that actually happens. But it's quite challenging for us in the press to be able to tell the story of the Artemis program in whole, when the piece of the pie that involves bringing humans down to the surface is, shrouded in a lot of unknowns and, passages in our articles where we have to say we reached out for comment and didn't hear back before publication, or something of that ilk.
Yep, I fully agree with everything you just said, Will. I will note that I don't. SpaceX doesn't really know exactly how many tanker flights it will take to send or to refill a Starship HLS spacecraft to go out to the moon.
Oh,
That's
Stephen,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to cut you off. Just want to let folks know that we are in a hold. The countdown clock stopped at actually T minus 1 hour 2 seconds is when it backed up to. So we're standing by for further to learn more about the hold and if SpaceX has a new T0 that they're targeting, what that will be. But just letting folks know that the clock is currently in a hold right now, and SpaceX appears to no longer be targeting the opening of the window, but they do have a fair amount of time before they have to call it a day. Just pulling up their specific comment that they have a window that runs from 6:15 p.m. Central Time to 7:30 p.m. Central Time. So that's 8:30 Eastern, 0030 UTC would be their end of the window today. So a little bit longer for us to have a conversation about all the ins and outs of Starship before we actually see a launch. Things are going to get a little bit stickier when it comes to the Kuiper mission, which also has its own question marks around it, given the status of the booster recovery zone. But as of now, that countdown clock is still marching forward with currently that clock at T minus 1 hour, 48 minutes, and about 30 seconds.
Yeah, Will. So maybe we'll see our first night Starship launch.
Yeah, I was just thinking what time sunset is going to be down there at Starbase. Let me go ahead and
I
pull up
just
my.
looked that up for you, Will. It's at South Padre Island. It's 7:02 p.m. Central Time. So, 47 minutes into the window is when sunset is, and even if it launches after that, it'll still be some ambient light, but could be a really nice jellyfish effect if it launches 10 15 minutes after sunset.
Yeah, and certainly for folks that are watching from Central to South Florida and in the Turks and Caicos Islands, could be a very nice launch for them at that hour. So, not necessarily the plan, but it could be a nice little surprise here for everybody involved. Again, for those who are just joining us, SpaceX is currently in an unscheduled hold with the clock that is stopped at T minus 1 hour and 2 seconds as things currently stand. For juxtaposition, we've thrown up the countdown timeline for the launch of the Kuiper mission. That's looking at a T0 liftoff currently at 8:08 p.m. Eastern, 0008 UTC, and this will be the third and final booked flight of Amazon's Project Kuiper satellites on board a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, at least as things currently stand. Certainly, SpaceX has many more missions, or excuse me, Amazon has many more missions booked on non-Falcon rockets, which include 38 flights on the Vulcan rocket from United Launch Alliance. Stephen, since we're in a hold with Starship and we've got our views of Pad 40, you and I had much time to talk about the Kuiper constellation since it started putting up satellites into low Earth orbit. Just wonder your thoughts on how it's been progressing so far with the now 3 missions on an Atlas rocket and forthcoming third and final flight on a Falcon 9.
Yeah, it certainly appears, that Amazon has ramped up their satellite production really, really rapidly. They're at 129 satellites now launched. I think the mission tonight, correct me if I'm wrong, will 24 more satellites launching tonight. That'll bring them to 163. So that's, I'm doing my math right, that's about 5% of the entire constellation that will be up, which doesn't sound like a lot, but 163 satellites launched in a matter of what has it been, 6 months or less now, faster than Starlink ramped up at the beginning of the Starlink launch campaigns back in 2019. So I think the hurdle right now is getting rockets available to launch these Kuiper satellites. And I haven't heard any confirmation, but it wouldn't surprise me if Amazon buys more launches from SpaceX. This is the last of the original 3. Of course, they have the Atlas V out there. I think a half dozen of those still to launch for Kuiper as well. So those launches are available. But they need Vulcan to be available. They need New Glenn and Ariane 6 to become available to them as well. They, on those rockets, they have other missions ahead of them in the queue. So I think this on the satellite side, Amazon is doing quite well. And with their launches, they're going to need to launch at some point a few times a month to get the kind of flight cadence they want. That of course that'll be divided between all the various rockets that I just mentioned. So they're not there yet, and I'll be interested to hear if Amazon goes back to SpaceX and tries to buy a package deal for a few more Falcon 9s.
Yeah, that'll be certainly interesting to see if they are able to hop into the manifest for SpaceX at some point, before we really start to see the rest of those rockets that it's booked to fly. I believe your colleague Eric Berger reported that it won't be until somewhere in the middle of 2026 or later before Blue Origin starts launching missions for the Kuiper constellation. That, given its size, both with the rocket itself as well as the 7-meter fairing, would be presumably capable of carrying the most Kuipers into low Earth orbit. Although, Stephen, you may know, but I don't recall if either Blue Origin or Amazon has specifically said how many Kuipers the New Glenn will be able to launch into space, though Caleb Henry in our conversation earlier said that from what they understand, it's about 61.
Yep. Will, can you hear me?
Yep, I still got you.
Yeah, that's the number I have off the top of my head as well. Around 61 Kuiper satellites per New Glenn flight, and I think my memory serves 45 for a
23.
Vulcan launch.
Gotcha. And we do have a new T0 for the Starship launch. It's 7:23, closer to 7:24 for those who are watching live and in person. So our countdown clock moving back again, now less than 58 minutes ahead of the planned flight of Starship Flight 11. So good news, Stephen, that we've got a moving clock once again.
Yeah, so still well before sunset, so still a daytime launch, and I guess we're 3 or 4 minutes away from startup prop load if everything is according to the timeline.
Yep, we should see Starship launch just about a little more than half an hour before Kuiper launches, so it's going to be an interesting bit of crossover now that the countdowns are more overlapping than initially anticipated. For those of you who were not with us at the beginning of our broadcast, we will have a dedicated, separate Kuiper stream where you'll be able to follow the fueling timeline for that mission. Unlike our typical flights or launch coverage, it'll be slightly lighter commentary since there's only one of me, and we'll be focusing predominantly up on the Starship launch, since it has the mission milestones, the pre-launch milestones that are happening first, and we'll toggle back and forth, of course, so light commentary, but we will have a dedicated stream beginning about an hour prior to liftoff on that mission. So we're just a little more than half an hour, about 40 minutes away from the start of our Kuiper stream. For those of you just hopping into the broadcast now, currently T-minus 54 minutes, 43 seconds and counting. SpaceX is counting down towards liftoff of Starship Flight 11 with a new T0 of 6:23 p.m. Central, 7:23 p.m. Eastern, 23:23 UTC for our friends joining around the world. If needed, SpaceX does have some more wiggle room with which it can move around the T0. That lasts until 7:30 p.m. Central Time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. But we are nudging closer to a sunrise, or a sunset launch, I should say, with a sunset scheduled for 7:02 p.m. Central Time. Just taking a look at our view from friend of the channel, Pete Carstens with Max Q Productions. You can see a little bit of movement on the water, a little bit of a breeze with those brushes in the foreground, but it looks fairly pleasant down there at South Padre Island, looking across the water towards Starbase. Nice little group photo as well, a good memento for that group of folks traveling from perhaps as close as Brownsville, Texas, or Stephen, I know from the last time that you were down there and the times that I've been fortunate enough to be down there, there are people that quite literally travel from all over the world to be down there in the vicinity of Starbase when it comes time for a rocket launch. Just pulling on your past memory and experience of having been there in a reporting capacity, what's kind of the mood like when you get down to this point of being less than an hour ahead of a launch like this?
Yeah, typically at this point in my experience, it's quite a festive atmosphere. A lot of some music playing. The live stream from SpaceX, of course, will be playing as that gets closer to actually starting, to have an update on where things stand with the countdown and the launch itself. But it's generally a very festive atmosphere. It's almost like a SpaceX con, so to speak, there with lots of space enthusiasts and SpaceX enthusiasts and Elon Musk enthusiasts there, all sharing. And those are three different types of people, by the way, all sharing the same space. And it's quite an atmosphere. And then in the final 5 or 10 minutes, it gets quiet, and people are starting to focus on what's happening with the launch and wanting to enjoy it as much as they can. And then, of course, after launch, it gets loud again, both from the sound of the rocket and from the cheers.
Yes, indeed. And do have latest tweet from SpaceX that the Starship team is go for prop load. Fueling of the rocket should be underway now, as we're T-minus 51 minutes, 16 seconds and counting. Start of fueling begins with loading of liquid methane on board the ship upper stage, followed by ship LOX load at the T-minus 46-minute 10-second mark, which we should see that vent from the Starship Tower Megacella wrap up before we see the beginning of ship LOX load. So that'll be a good visual marker that the feed lines are thermally conditioned to the correct temperature and that LOX load is about to begin. We'll see something similar when we get into the fueling of the Falcon 9 here at Pad 40 ahead of the forthcoming launch of the Kuiper Falcon 3 mission. Gosh, there's too much happening today. Taking a quick look at our live chat here as we're just about 49 minutes away from liftoff. Want to welcome a new channel member, Forrest Stubbs, joining us with membership at the pad leader level. Welcome aboard, Forrest. We're glad to have you with us. Just about 48 minutes to go ahead of Flight 11 for the Starship program. We're coming up on ship LOX load beginning in now less than 2 minutes. Stephen, we'll hopefully see a lot that we've seen before with Flight 10, but among the various objectives that SpaceX has for this mission, what are you most looking forward to? Whether it's with the booster or the ship upper stage or some other element of this flight, what's kind of top of mind that you're watching to make sure it goes as expected, or if it doesn't go as expected?
Will, since this is largely, although not entirely, a copy of Flight 10, I'll probably give the same answer I gave from Flight 10, which is the heat shield, and want to see how the tiles hold up. They're doing more experiments with the heat shield this time, different types of things. Same flavor of experiments, but tiles missing in different areas. No metallic tiles. They've added that crunch wrap material around some of the tiles that we talked about earlier to try to just beef them up and make them more resilient to all the temperatures and aerodynamic forces that they encounter in flight. And I think that's going to be what I really am looking forward to see what kind of condition the ship is when it reaches the Indian Ocean. Hopefully it makes it that far, and and also eager to see how the launch goes itself. The launch last time went pretty much nearly perfectly. I think they lost one Raptor engine on ascent, which in my mind is not that huge of a deal. eventually they need 100% on that. But at this point, that's much lesser of an issue, in my opinion, than trying to get the heat shield right and eventually catching the ship to enable that higher flight rate that we talked about, which is fundamental to all these other things they want to do with Starship.
Yeah, absolutely. The more they can learn about the heat shield, certainly the better. Couple quick items we want to update you with on. One, SpaceX notes, as we were just mentioning, that prop load is underway on the upper stage. You can see the venting has wrapped up, and SpaceX should be now loading liquid oxygen on board the ship upper stage. The other item to let you all know about is that SpaceX has punted back the upcoming launch of the Kuiper mission, now looking for a departure from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station at 8:34 p.m. Eastern. So don't know if the slide with Starship is directly correlating to the slide in the Falcon launch, but deconflicting some of the overlap there, certainly, which from a logistics perspective on the back end is very much welcome. I'll say that for my part of our team here. So 8:34 current T0, 0034 UTC for the flight of the rocket you see there on the left-hand side of your screen, the Falcon 9 standing tall at Pad 40 with 24 Project Kuiper satellites on board. Meanwhile, our next fueling milestone with the Starship rocket is coming up in just about 3 minutes, when the fuel, the liquid methane for the booster, will start to flow. Before we get there, do want to go to a piece of tape real quick. This is for those of you who had a chance to watch part of our pre-launch video. This is a chunk of that, but germane to what we were just talking about as far as learnings from the heat shield on Starship Flight 10. This is some comments from Bill Gerstenmaier, the Vice President of Build and Flight Reliability, when he was speaking at the American Astronautical Society's Glenn Symposium up in Columbus, Ohio. You'll hear the voice of Bill Gerstenmaier at the beginning, and you'll actually see his face at the very end of this clip.
We put 3 metal tiles on the side of the ship to see if they would provide adequate heat control, because they would be simpler to manufacture and more durable than the ceramic tiles. Turns out they're not. They didn't do so good, and they oxidized extremely nice in the high oxygen environment. So that nice orange color, kind of like a shuttle external tank color, and maybe paying homage to the shuttle program, was created by those 3 little metal tiles up on top.
Gerstenmaier says the white coloration is from an ablative material underneath the heat shield tiles.
And when it ablates, it creates this white residue. So what that's showing us is that we're having heat essentially get into that region between the tiles, go underneath the tiles, and this ablative structure is then ablating underneath. So again, we learned that we need to seal the tiles.
The way that NASA sealed the tiles on both the Shuttle Orbiter and Orion backshell was by using a ceramic cloth infused with a silicone polymer. SpaceX uses a different material that could be spotted in the darker area of the nose cone.
What we found out there was we put a new material in underneath the SDI pop. We call it crunch wrap. It's like wrapping paper that goes around each tile. And then when these tiles are mechanically held in place, they're snapped in by a robot. And when we push the tile in, this little wrapping paper essentially sits around the sides of each one of the tiles, and then we cut it off on the surface. So what we found was that this crunch wrap technique is allowing us to essentially seal between the tiles without putting a gap filler in between the tiles. So this is kind of what we're going to fly on this next flight, on Flight 11. When we fly here, we're going to put essentially crunch wrap everywhere and see if we can get better sealing and better tile performance moving forward.
Time now T-minus 41 minutes, 14 seconds and counting. Latest update from SpaceX confirming that prop load of the Super Heavy booster is now underway. And we should be getting some additional pad level views from SpaceX in roughly 10 minutes when they start their live coverage as well. So things progressing towards the final flight of version 2 of the Starship and Super Heavy. Bon voyage to this iteration of the rocket, as well as this configuration for Pad A. Stephen, it's always great to hear from Bill Gerstenmaier, whether it was his comments during the run-up to the Polaris Dawn mission, or hearing him speak at that conference for the Glenn Symposium up in Columbus, Ohio. Obviously, he had more to say than just those comments. Having watched that full presentation, your thoughts on what Bill had to say about the state of the Starship program and what's coming down the road for them?
Yeah, that was a great talk from Bill Gerstenmaier about a month ago now, I believe, up in Ohio. It's always good to hear him speak because he has a way of, he's extremely technically knowledgeable and astute. And he also has a way of communicating very complicated concepts, let's say, to a non-technical audience. So when he explains something as a reporter, I can often quote him because he explains it in complete sentences in an easy to understand way better than I certainly could on my own. So it's great to hear him speak about things SpaceX related. Of course, he had a long career at NASA before coming to SpaceX. But yeah, I had an opportunity toward the end of that event to ask him about when SpaceX will attempt to fly all the way into low Earth orbit with Starship, because all these flights so far have been suborbital, including today's test flight. And he said with version 3, it'll probably be no sooner than flight 13. So 2 flights from now will be the soonest that SpaceX will actually attempt to go to orbit, and that hinges on a successful outcome to flight 12, which will be the first flight of the upgraded V3 version 3 of Starship. And he said that is expected to debut sometime early next year.
Yeah, and version 3 carries a lot on its proverbial shoulders, certainly, with it being the future pathway for the Artemis program, for SpaceX's deep space and Mars ambitions, and of course from a business sense, getting the V3 Starlink satellites up into low Earth orbit, as we heard Caleb talk about earlier in the broadcast. So pretty important inflection point for SpaceX to fly out the final version 2 rocket and clear the way for some key upgrades to be made at Pad A as Pad B comes online for the first time, like you said, Stephen, with that first suborbital flight of version 3 Starship, with lots of improvements, the introduction of a new iteration of the Raptor engines, different configuration for the, actually this is a good angle to point out the grid fins, which will be shifted from their 4 grid fin configuration that you're seeing right now to a 3 fin configuration with even larger and more durable grid fins flying on the V3 booster.
Right. You got lots of changes coming with version 3. Also, it'll have larger propellant tanks to try to increase the capacity and upmass capability that Starship can carry into orbit. Raptor version 3, Raptor 3 will be flying on version 3 eventually as well. So lots of changes coming. And we saw that jump from version 1 to version 2 did not go so well. And I know SpaceX hopes that that jump from version 2 to version 3 will go better. Maybe there's a better chance of that going well this time because they have all the lessons learned from version 2 they can roll into version 3. So one thing I'm also interested in is how quickly SpaceX starts dismantling the launch mount and other infrastructure at Pad A after this launch, and starts modifying Pad A for version 3 of Starship, because they're going to need Pad A to be active sometime next year. They'll need a second launch pad active, I should say, sometime next year to enable the in-orbit refueling demonstration.
Yeah, that'll capture a lot of attention when you see the first tanker Starship launch and park itself up in low Earth orbit, and hopefully either SpaceX or NASA or some combination of the two will hold some type of pre-launch briefing so that members of the press can ask a number of the questions that we have about that mission, like, what is the orbital altitude of that tanker Starship in orbit? Have they pared down the number of expected flights it will take to fully refuel? What's the ideal cadence for loading up a tanker version of Starship in low Earth orbit? There's just so much that we can speculate on, but that's not going to be known without some specific answers from SpaceX. And just noting, we're looking at the Super Heavy booster as fueling continues on. We're just about 35 minutes away from the flight of this Starship Super Heavy booster, with the next fueling milestone. We just passed the start of booster LOX load beginning. Seeing a little bit of a frost line there at the base of the rocket as LOX now just a little more than a minute and a half into the loading process. The next big milestone is coming up at T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds when the Raptor chill down sequence begins. And that'll be for both the 33 engines on the booster as well as the 6 on the ship upper stage. Taking a quick peek at our live chat here. First off, want to thank the more than 8,800 of you that are watching along with us live at this point in the count. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage, since we've got about 33 and a half minutes remaining on the clock. Also want to thank Paul Kelly for gifting a Spacefly Now membership. I really appreciate that, Paul. Thank you so much for your support. And to our newest gifted member, welcome aboard. We're very glad to have you with us. Be sure to thank Paul in the live chat if you haven't already. We hope you stick around with channel membership beyond the month you were just gifted. Well, not to say that between the Starship and the Kuiper missions, Stephen, you don't have your plate perfectly full as far as things to report on between these two SpaceX missions. But, what's kind of top of your reporter notepad these days? What are you most looking forward to covering in the next, say, week or so? I know the last time we spoke, you mentioned you've got your eye on a couple of things happening in the more defense space, but what's that looking like these days?
Yeah. Good question, Will. Yeah, that's sort of fallen into my responsibilities at ours, is to delve into military space, and one of the big topics there is, of course, Golden Dome. I've had a few stories on that as things have progressed actually quite slowly with Golden Dome since the Trump executive order in January. We still haven't seen any detailed architecture or any really outline of an architecture come out. I don't anticipate we'll get details. A lot of it's going to be classified, but there was indication that an outline would be released, and that has not happened yet. So interested to see what comes of that, as there's a 60-day review that ended, I believe, a couple of weeks ago, and eager to hear the outcome of that architecture review for Golden Dome. any time now, hopefully. The other thing, of course, is preparations of Artemis 2 down at Kennedy Space Center, which I know you have a front row seat to, Will. Hopefully, we'll see the Orion spacecraft move over to the Vehicle Assembly Building soon and be stacked on top of the Space Launch System inside the VAB High Bay. And it's not this week, but next week, we'll see the first flight of Japan's HTV-X cargo ship to the International Space Station. JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, has had that vehicle in development for about a decade now. And the first flight carrying cargo to the ISS will be launching next Monday, U.S. time. And it'll be the first of at least 3 of those flights that go to ISS. And eventually, JAXA wants to use this vehicle to resupply the Gateway station in lunar orbit if and when that eventually gets assembled around the moon.
Certainly lots to keep us busy between all of that and quite a bit more else going on. Obviously, there's the onboarding of Rocket Lab's Neutron rocket up at Mars, the, see if I can remember this acronym, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport. I think that's
right.
The acronym. Yep. Up at Wallops Island, Virginia, which is adjacent to NASA's Wallops facility. So at last, I'd heard that Rocket Lab was still aiming to launch Neutron before the end of this calendar year. So we'll see if they're able to meet that milestone, but certainly an exciting entry of another rocket. Obviously, things are continuing to move along with a big cash infusion over at Stoke Space. That'll be launching their rocket from Launch Complex 14 here at the Cape. So quite a bit of new launch activity that it's going to be coming online, at least as things are outlined right now in the coming year and certainly the next few years. A little bit further down the road, you've got Viaspace looking to launch from Slick 13, the pad space that they're sharing with Phantom Space. And you've got Astra that's hoping to bring Rocket 4 to market in the future as well. So quite a bit coming down the pike. But bringing things more back here to the present, we've got pad level views now from SpaceX showing the Starship rocket and the venting tank farm. So things are progressing nicely towards liftoff coming up here in less than 29 minutes from now. time now, T-minus 25 minutes, 43 seconds and counting. You're taking a look back at some video from SpaceX showing the milestones accomplished during Starship Flight 10 back in late August. As we talked about earlier in the broadcast, SpaceX will be not recovering the Super Heavy booster again today. We'll see, if all goes well, another deployment of 8 Starlink simulators again today. That's coming up a little ways into the coast phase for this mission. Looking at the payload deployment beginning just about 18 and a half minutes into the mission. The relight demo will happen at about T plus 37 minutes and 49 seconds into flight. This is the look back at reentry, and as we heard from Bill Gerstenmaier, and as we've been talking about, we will not be seeing that orange color splashed across the heat shield tiles because SpaceX is not, as far as we're aware, using metallic tiles again on this mission, which, of course, oxidized and created that orange color across the heat shield. So our T-minus 24 minutes and 9 seconds and counting coming up. Our next fueling milestone that we're watching for is the Raptor engine chill beginning at about T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds. Taking a look back now at some video of the pre-launch activities from SpaceX, the static fire of the Super Heavy booster B-15 and the Starship upper stage Ship 38. This was the second and final time that SpaceX had to use the special adapter to allow for testing on the orbital launch mount, as SpaceX suffered some damage over at the Massey's test site in the pre-launch testing ahead of Flight 10. Time now T-minus 19 minutes, 18 seconds and counting. The Raptor engine chill sequence should be underway. Meanwhile, as we're tracking things here in Florida towards planned liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket coming up at 8:34 p.m. Eastern, 0034 UTC. The Brevard County Emergency Operations Center has activated in support of that mission. We'll have a dedicated live stream going up for the Kuiper mission beginning and want to pause and retract that statement. In part, we are looking at a new T0 for the Starlink launch at 9. Sorry, not Starlink. For Kuiper on board a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket is now looking at 9:58 p.m. Eastern, 01:58 UTC. So the good news on that front is the Starship mission, once it lifts off, it'll go through its full launch campaign and splashdown with enough time to create a full separation between that mission and the upcoming Kuiper launch. So instead of having slimmed down commentary, we'll be able to do that launch in a more nominal fashion, if you will. So don't go too far away because we'll have another launch coming up in pretty short order after we wrap up with the launch of Starship Flight 11.
So
Awesome.
It's really going to be much more visceral.
Yeah, you're gonna feel
Great
it.
place
It's
to
gonna
watch.
be, it's gonna be, it's gonna be awesome.
When it's filming?
We'll be in here this time, but usually we're out there watching. Yeah.
All right, sounds good. All
Good
right,
luck
later.
and have fun.
Have fun.
And a perhaps unplanned cameo from Elon Musk, who is not on console for this mission, as they were just about to show off the flight plan for the mission. See this animation here on the left-hand side of your screen. This will look fairly familiar for those of you who've been with us to cover Starship missions earlier this year. The Super Heavy booster will target an aquatic splashdown in the Gulf. Re-entry will happen with a splashdown off the coast of Australia, and likely teams have once again deployed buoys to capture splashdown. This is an animation showing Starship version 3 that will launch from Pad 2. Or Pad B, I should say. taking a look at some video of the updated fuel line transfer tube. Saw some stills of this earlier this year, but some good B-roll of this here, which SpaceX says is comparable in size to a Falcon 9 booster. And this is the top of the fuel tank with the updated interstage design. Right now, the current version of Starship and Super Heavy uses the hot stage single-use ring, which will be replaced by that. These are the newer hypersonic grid fins. Teams will use the grid fins in addition for steering. This is the Raptor 3. SpaceX's Dan Hout notes that they will the grid fins be used for catching the booster as well. This is the vacuum Raptor 3. Just about 12 minutes now to the planned liftoff of this final flight of a version 2 Starship rocket. We're going to go ahead and dip into the SpaceX feed to listen to this update about the heat shield tiles and some of the work that's being done here in Florida here. Let's go ahead and listen in.
In just 3 years, tile production at the bakery has surpassed the total number of tiles produced during the 30 years of the shuttle program. To go from the raw material to a finished tile, it takes about 40 hours. And today, the bakery is producing about 1,000 tiles a day. But it's set up to produce enough tiles for 10 ships per month, which is about 7,000 tiles a day, or a tile off the line every 13 seconds. So yeah, the bakery is well on its way to providing Starship with all the tiles for missions to Mars and beyond. And for today's flight, we've made a modification to the heat shield tiles. Dan, do you mind filling us in on what's being referred to as the crunch wrap tile?
Absolutely. I always love to get to do a little show and tell. So we've got thousands of these heat shield tiles covering Starship. Now they're kind of all next to each other. There's a small gap in between all of them. You got to leave a little bit of space as that metal underneath will expand and contract. That way they don't crunch into each other and start breaking. However, that lets some of that plasma kind of seep through, and we see really high heating on the sides and then down on the metal. To help fix that, we have this, the crunch wrap that everyone has heard about. So we take essentially that's called Vulcan felt that we then wrap around. And so as these tiles are next to each other, you've got a small bit in between that's going to help offset that heating. It's just one of the ways we're continuing to iterate on this heat shield, getting towards rapid reusability. Hopefully it's going to help Starship live Moss. You know, everything is just going to get us to that end state of a fully and rapidly reusable vehicle. So pretty much the entire vehicle has those on it today. We've done this on multiple Starships previously, but this time pretty much the whole vehicle has it. So that was special for today. All right, enough heat shield tiles. Let's go quick check-in on the pad. So if you did notice, we did shift our T0 just a little bit. We're now counting down to 6:23 and 41 seconds Central Time. We shifted a little bit as we were working to finish clearing the range. We are monitoring sea and airspace, both here over the Gulf and in our splashdown location over on the Indian Ocean. We were working with the FAA, a lot of other international agencies to coordinate all of this. Good news, range is currently green. We're able to get everything out of the way that we are tracking in the Gulf. So weather status, I don't even really need to do, not a cloud in the sky, beautiful day, no probability of violation for launch at this point. We're not currently tracking any issues on the vehicle or the pad. You can see our fill levels are getting up there. We're almost completely done with our propellant loading. We've gone through all of our checkouts so far this morning, aligning our guidance, navigation, and control system, getting the vehicles ready for prop load, the farm. Everything has gone pretty smoothly so far. We got through our go, no go for prop load. That happens at T-minus 1 hour and 15 minutes. We've been loading fuel and locks on board the ship since about 53 minutes before launch. Booster started just about 10 minutes after that. We continue loading prop until just around 3 minutes before liftoff, and then at that point we'll be ready to go. So bottom line at the moment, we're looking real good. Again, 6:23 and 41 seconds Central Time is our target T0, so we're going to keep counting down.
And a lot of good updates and information there from SpaceX, looking at Starship version 3 and a little bit more on the tiles as well as production. Stephen, before we get into the final few minutes of the count, we were wondering what kind of update SpaceX may provide during its coverage. Your thoughts on the little bit we heard about regarding the tiles there in particular?
Yeah, a great hands-on demonstration from Dan Hewitt from SpaceX Communications, showing that crunch wrap material that we talked about a couple of times earlier in the broadcast, the material that actually goes under and around the sides of the tiles to seal the edges around the tiles. We had not seen a good visual of that really until now, exactly how that works. Bill Gerstenmaier had a good description of it, but it's good to put a visual with the description to fully understand what they're talking about. And it does seem like a novel solution and kind of a out of the box solution that SpaceX says was effective on Flight 10, and they're going to use it in more areas of the vehicle on Flight 11. And really, really interested to see what the ship looks like when it comes down in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, we've certainly seen some burn through in previous Starship flights, so I'll be particularly watching the hinges of the forward flaps to see how those perform, and I'm assuming that's one of the areas that they've focused on in putting the crunch wrap and really shoring up those tiles, since those are among the more vulnerable areas of the ship. So should be quite interesting to see the final moments of reentry between the addition of crunch wrap everywhere and that final banking maneuver.
Yep, excitement guaranteed, as SpaceX is apt to say.
Indeed. We'll go ahead and let Stephen go for the time being as we cruise into the final few minutes of the count, but don't worry, he's not going too terribly far. We'll pick up this conversation on the other side of liftoff. But for now, we're just under 6 minutes away from the planned liftoff of Starship Flight 11. You can see rendering of what the updated Gigabay will look like there at Starbase. This is the animation that we showed you earlier in our broadcast from Slick 37, Space Launch Complex 37 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where SpaceX is planning a couple of Starship towers for future launches of the V3. Coming up on 5 minutes to go, SpaceX's Dan Hewitt notes that the range remains green and they're working no issues at the moment with the Starship Super Heavy. See fairly light winds, about 13 miles per hour, roughly 81 degrees Fahrenheit. Weather, range, and vehicle are all go. You can see the current fuel load levels there on the left-hand side of your screen with that handy graphic. Some of the final things to count, they will arm the flight safety system. They will do the guidance, navigation, control systems checks. SpaceX is approaching the conclusion of fueling on the ship upper stage. Ship prop load is set to wrap up at about T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds, with booster load concluding about 30 seconds after that. With just a few minutes left on the clock, want to thank the 25,000 plus of you who are watching along with us live. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage in the final few minutes of the count. Booster prop load should be done. SpaceX continues to track no issues at this point in the countdown with just about 2 minutes remaining on the clock. Less than 2 minutes to go. A little bit of booster toggling there. Less than a minute and a half to go before liftoff. As a reminder, T-minus 40 seconds is the point at which SpaceX can hold if they need to, but right now it doesn't appear as though they're going to. Less than a minute remaining. Past the 40-second mark. They have polled go for launch. You've got about 20 seconds remaining in real time. 15 seconds. And here we go. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engines ignition. And we have movement. Liftoff. Liftoff of Starship Flight 11, the final flight of version 2 of the Starship Super Heavy rocket. 33 Raptor engines ignited, and the 400-plus foot tall rocket is making its ascent from Starbase.
Here at
We're coming up on max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. past max Q now, looking at most engines cutoff, or MECO. That'll be followed by hot staging just a couple of seconds afterwards, when those 6 Raptor engines on the ship upper stage ignite. Keeping our eyes open here in Florida to see if we can see the Starship rocket as it makes its pass just south of Florida. Roughly 30 seconds to MECO. So far, all 33 Raptor engines continue to burn nominally here on the second and final flight of B-15. Less than 10 seconds to MECO. And a good visual of hot staging there. Boost back burn underway. The booster will be targeting an aquatic splashdown in the Gulf. It will not return for a catch as intended with this mission. Looks like we've got 12 out of 13 engines on the booster. 6 engines on the ship upper stage. So far, a good nominal flight at this point of the upper stage. Boost back burn should be wrapping up here momentarily. There goes the hot stage ring. Little more than 4 minutes into flight. The next milestone is coming up at about T plus 6 minutes and 20 seconds when the landing burn should happen. SpaceX releasing some of the propellant prior to the start of that landing burn. You can see the hot staging ring falling in the foreground from the camera's perspective. There you can see the hot stage ring from Pete Carson's tracking shot. Confirmation of a nominal trajectory from SpaceX with the ship upper stage. SpaceX is less than a minute away from the start of the landing burn. Instead of going from 13 engines down to 3, SpaceX will instead go from 13 to 5 to 3. As is currently designed for this mission. This is going to be the type of configuration that SpaceX intends to use for the version 3 edition of the ship, of the Super Heavy booster. Coming up on the start of the landing burn in just a few seconds, and there it goes. All 313 down to 5. Down to 3. Booster should hover for a second before splashing down. Here you see the hover. Engines shut down. And coming into the ocean, or the Gulf. And some celebratory faces and cheering from the team at Starbase. Views of ship have come back. Let's go ahead to that. All 6 Raptor engines continue their first burn on the ship upper stage, S-38. Coming up in just about a minute and a half will be Starship engine cutoff, SECO 1. That'll happen at about T plus 8 minutes and 58 seconds. And we've got a nice view from our tracking camera here in Florida. You're looking at Ship 38 before it concludes its first burn. Well done to Adam. And a really nice view there as we're coming up to SECO. Really nice jellyfish effect there. And you can see the staggered shutdown of those Raptor engines happening in real time. Still got good views from here in Florida. Confirmation of a nominal orbit insertion. Ship continues its coast phase here. Still some great tracking shots from here in Florida. Just had to pop off mic for a brief second to see this with my own eyes. You've got a really nice view of the ship passing over the Kennedy Space Center press site here. Stephen, as we are now in this coast phase, your thoughts on the mission so far? Seems like a nominal test of the Super Heavy booster like SpaceX wanted, and we've got some really nice views continuing on with the Starship upper stage.
Yeah, the flight so far has really gone perfectly from what I could tell, other than there was that signature on the display of one engine during the boost back burn that was not firing. But yeah, the Super Heavy booster looked like it came down controlled. The step down from 13 engines to 5 to 3 during the landing burn looked like that was all smooth. The ship looks like it's performing excellent so far. I was actually just looking back at the last flight, and the ship reached the exact same velocity down to the same kilometer per hour, 26,495 kilometers per hour at SECO, at second stage engine cutoff. So that is exactly where they were on the last flight. So they should be on the right trajectory right now out toward the Indian Ocean.
That's all good to hear, and hopefully things will continue on. We'll have essentially a repeat as far as the flight path for Ship 38 that we saw with Ship 37 in Flight 10. We're just about coming up on 12 minutes into this mission so far, and in about 6.5 minutes from now, we'll see the start of the payload deployment sequence with those Starlink simulators that will be jettisoned from the so-called PEZ dispenser on the ship upper stage, which it's a little bit hard to see with this lighting, but you can just barely make out the outline of the PEZ dispenser door. Actually, that was a nice illumination of it. It's just above the S38 lettering there on the steel part of ship, which is above the edge of the tile line. If you're looking from the bottom of your screen towards the top, you can see the arc of the PEZ dispenser door. Stephen, like we've been talking about throughout the course of the broadcast, obviously among the most important things for SpaceX to get from this mission is learnings about the heat shield, but also quite important for them is to be able to capture good data about how they can deploy these V3, the future V3 version of the Starlink satellites.
Yes. It was pretty interesting to see on the last flight. Wasn't really sure what to expect. We've seen the animation for years now of what the PEZ dispenser is like, but to see it in action last time was really kind of cool. The pulley system they have inside the vehicle to raise up each Starlink before it's ejected out the door. All kind of cool. Really neat to see all that function on the last flight, and we should see it again in a few minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see if I can bring in that animation that we saw earlier in the broadcast, a nice comparison of the previous iteration of the Starlink satellites. So let's see if I can add this momentarily. Time now T plus 15 minutes, 57 seconds and counting. We're just a few minutes away from the start of the payload deployment demo. Before we get there, just want to show off this animation that we were alluding to that SpaceX showed briefly, the difference in size between the version 1.5 Starlink satellites, the V2 minis, which are currently launching, and the version 3 Starlinks stand-in are currently on board Ship 38, which you can see inside the payload bay right now. Those large steel structures which are designed to simulate the size and mass of future Starlink V3 satellites. Stephen, now that we've got the visual here, was there anything more that you wanted to add about what we were hearing from SpaceX and what we'll be seeing shortly with the deployment of these demo satellites?
Just I wanted to bring the attention to the size difference. So the version 1.5 satellites began launching. Was that in? I'd have to go back and look. So many Starlink versions several years ago, and then version 2 mini started launching in 2023, if my memory serves correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And version 3 should begin launching next year. But just seeing the size difference from one solar array to 2 solar arrays, I believe version 2, the dimensions with the arrays deployed is about 30 meters.
Yep, 30 meters.
So just looking at version 3, I don't want to hazard an estimate, but significantly more than 30 meters tip to tip.
Yeah, it looks like it's almost double the size of each solar array, maybe slightly less than doubling the length. So, adding another 30 meters on top of that, so 60 meters total, I guess. I mean, super duper ballparking right now based off of an animation.
Yeah, I mean, these might be the largest solar arrays. I need to go look this up. Might be a good little piece of trivia to know about, but these may be the largest solar arrays flying in space, other than the International Space Station and maybe Tiangong, the Chinese station.
It'll be some good Space Coast Bar trivia for you.
Yes.
And it looks like, given the position of the cameras, we may get an external deployment shot, which would be a first on this mission. Not quite exactly the angle of the animation that we've seen, but since there isn't a separate camera that's flying alongside Starship, I guess this is our next best thing of getting a third-party vantage point of the deployment of these demonstration satellites.
Right, yeah. Of course, they're in the Earth's shadow, so they're out over the Atlantic Ocean. No sunlight, so it's going to be hard to see, although it looks like there is a light. There are lights inside the ship that we can see shining out that door, so we should see something move when they begin the deployments here momentarily.
And we've got some movement. The first of the dummy satellites is being released. During the last flight of Starship Super Heavy, we were told it was about a minute per deployment, and that the version 3 iteration of Starship would be capable of carrying on the order of 60 Starlink satellites, so taking right about an hour for a full stack to deploy, at least at the onset. So this is roughly analogous to what we will be seeing for future V3 deployment, where you see them deploy 2, and then the stack will lower down, the next one will be prepared, and we'll see it go off on its own. And just as a reminder for viewers, this is a suborbital mission. These demonstrator Starlink satellites will follow the same trajectory as the ship upper stage. They will not stay in orbit, or they are not being deployed into orbit, I should say. They're following the suborbital trajectory and will also splash down in the Indian Ocean. Something we also don't normally see, or at least I haven't typically picked up on, a nice little peek at maybe a supplier for part of Starship. We've got a barcode and a Made in the USA label with. They've gone to a double view, so it's a little bit harder to read, but that's the COPV for the ship, one of the COPVs. Which, of course, one of the big updates for the version 2 was to shore up the COPVs following the explosion that happened during pre-flight static fire testing with Ship 36 out at the Massey's test stand, which is why SpaceX has, with Ship 37 and 38, been doing static fires over at Pad A instead of at that test site. And a view from the outside, but it's quite tough to see the dummy Starlinks deploy from there. Hopefully the first time that SpaceX is deploying actual V3 Starlink satellites, they will do it in orbital daylight, so you can just barely make it out at the top of your screen, that shape that's drifting away from Ship 38. As you can see with the telemetry data on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, Ship 38 is currently out over the Atlantic Ocean, making its way towards its destination, the splashdown out in the Indian Ocean. And this looks to be the final of the 8 Starlink simulator satellites, all deployed nominally. The second time in the Starship program that SpaceX has been able to deploy these satellites, or these simulator satellites, that again are not being launched into orbit, but following the suborbital trajectory of the ship upper stage. The payload bay door is going to be closing, and coming up next is the engine relight. The single Raptor engine coming up at about T plus 37 minutes and 49 seconds. And a nice view of the SpaceX team elated at the success so far of Starship Flight 11. Certainly an important chapter being closed here as teams look now, or soon, towards the upcoming launches of the version 3 edition of Starship Super Heavy from Pad B. As a reminder to our viewers who may have joined in a little bit later in the broadcast in regard to the Falcon 9 rocket from here in Florida, SpaceX did push back that T0 liftoff of Kuiper Falcon number 3. Now looking at a liftoff from Pad 40 at 9:58 p.m. Eastern, 1:58 UTC. So deconflicting with the Starship launch, and we'll have live dedicated coverage of that mission beginning about an hour prior to liftoff. Currently in a coast phase ahead of the relight demonstration with one of those Raptor engines. It gives us a moment to peek over at the live chat. Thank a few folks for your support as we continue to watch the progress of Starship Flight 11. Want to welcome in new channel members Shannon McAdams, Todd Eaton, and returning channel members, the Rocket Girl and Psychonaut 69. Welcome aboard to all of you. I'm glad to have you with us. As a reminder, channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, which is shop.spaceflightnow.com, access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in Florida in 4K. T plus 31 minutes, 5 seconds and counting. Just about 6 minutes away from the start of that relight demonstration. Want to thank our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images for very generously gifting 20 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that, guys. And to our 20 newest gifted members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Chuck and Jen in the live chat. And we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership beyond the month that you were just gifted. Getting some views back now of the ship upper stage. Appears to be continuing to follow a nominal trajectory here as the engine relight is coming up now in just about 5 minutes. In addition to the Falcon 9 rocket launch that's coming up in just about 2 hours from now. If you haven't already gotten your fill, by the time tonight is over, there's another Falcon 9 rocket launch setting to lift off from Vandenberg Space Force Base. That's coming up in just about 23 hours and 15 minutes with the latest batch of satellites for the Space Development Agency's Tranche 1 Transport Layer C. This next batch of satellites that's launching are manufactured by Lockheed Martin. Stephen, bringing you back in for a moment while we're watching Starship continue to coast, since you're, I would say, a bit more plugged into the defense space than I am. Thankfully, you're with us on this broadcast. Just want to get your thoughts on now coming up to the second flight for the Space Development Agency's constellation of satellites, the first 21 that were deployed by SpaceX, built by York Space. Got the next 21 on deck from Lockheed Martin. And probably the next ones will be coming up from Northrop Grumman.
Yeah, well, this is the second of, I think, 10 launches planned for this generation of Space Development Agency satellites. This is deploying basically the Pentagon's own mega constellation. This first generation will be 150 satellites. There are plans for hundreds more over the next few years or so. And this transport layer is one element of a multi-layer architecture. The transport layer is essentially, they're essentially data relaying communication satellites in low Earth orbit. And they will be joined by what's called the tracking layer early next year. And those actually have sensors on board to detect missile launches, but not just ballistic missiles, which is what the military's early warning network is currently focused on. These SDA satellites are much closer to the Earth, and they can detect the faint signals or signatures from even hypersonic missiles, even cruise missiles potentially, to provide early warning of threats that are emerging, basically, because hypersonic missiles were not really a thing when the military devised its existing current generation of early warning satellites. So this network eventually, when fully deployed, is designed to basically be able to detect a missile launch and then transmit that data, where the missile is, where it's heading, directly to a shooter on the ground, whether it's a Patriot missile battery or ATACMS or some other type of interceptor, maybe in the future, even a space-based interceptor with Golden Dome, to be able to take out that missile. So this particular launch is the second of 10 in this generation, but what will eventually be many dozens of SDA launches going forward to deploy this network.
Want to pick up that conversation in just a second, but we're about a minute away from the Raptor in space relight demo, so want to pivot back to the Starship mission for a moment, and then we'll pick up our conversation on SDA constellation here in just a second. This, as we've been talking about, Stephen, of course, is an important demonstration that will be able to show that SpaceX in future missions can perform a safe deorbit burn, which is not what they're doing here. This is just a demonstration of the capability, but an important one that they'll need for safe Starship operations moving forward with version 3. In-light demo expected in about 20 seconds. And there we've got ignition and a good shutdown. Confirmation of a second nominal orbit insertion. Certainly good news for SpaceX and the Starship program, as version 2 of Starship is about to wrap up here with the conclusion of this mission. Currently T plus 38 minutes, 38 seconds in this flight. In less than 10 seconds be the start of the atmospheric entry period. Stephen, going back to the conversation we were just having about the Space Development Agency, as we continue to track views of the ship upper stage, just noting for our viewers some of the shifting of the camera view or the movement of the forward flaps in which the camera is perched. Stephen, earlier this year we saw a handful of missions for the National Reconnaissance Office proliferated architecture, which is the NRO's own mega constellation, which they're hoping will consist of hundreds of what we believe to be Star Shield satellites. Obviously, the NRO is far less open and transparent with the inner workings of their satellite constellation, but from the reporting you've done on SDA and from the little that we do know about the NRO's constellation, what are some of the key differences that you're following between what the SDA is hoping to accomplish with its constellation and the NRO?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because historically there's often been a turf war between NRO and the Department of Defense, but the NRO, my understanding, the public understanding of what the NRO's constellation does is it is essentially a network of reconnaissance satellites. So it's presumably electro-optical sensors on board to observe the ground and basically do what the NRO does with its other satellites, but this proliferated architecture that the NRO is deploying in partnership with SpaceX and we think Northrop Grumman is basically creating this constellation of satellites looking down at the Earth to provide really rapid refresh of imagery of different places around the world, more so than the NRO's existing satellites could do on their own. The SDA constellation initially is going to be focused on missile warning and data relay and tasking of different weapon systems. So basically the the SDA constellation can detect where a missile is and send that information directly to an interceptor or the cockpit of an airplane or a warship, wherever that interceptor is in position needed to take out the threat. And eventually, though, the SDA constellation in the future is looking at proliferating or deploying numerous satellites to augment things like GPS, also augment other parts of the Space Force's what they do in space, including potentially things like non-Earth imaging and other types of activities. So it's not, the SDA vision is not just limited to missile warning and data relay. There are other applications eventually as well, even weather monitoring potentially down the road that the SDA is looking at doing. But right now they're focusing on missile warning and data relay, and NRO is focused on surveillance and reconnaissance.
And we're just hit a quick technical snafu. We're working to get this stream back up here momentarily for you folks. Apologies for the brief interruption. We should have views coming back online momentarily, so bear with us here for just a moment. And there we've got those views back. Currently T plus 45 minutes, 27 seconds and counting. SpaceX continues to bring its Starship back for a splashdown in the Indian Ocean. Still getting some pretty solid views from the various cameras around the ship. SpaceX has 4 Starlink terminals As you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, the ship upper stage is just southeast of the island of Madagascar as it continues its path towards splashdown in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Australia. Got a nice little dragon decal by the look of it near the end of the aft flap that we saw for just a brief second. Stephen, did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, just wanted to note that they're now below the Kármán line, so 88 kilometers and descending.
Good note there. Now back from the demarcation of space as it continues on, heading towards its destined splashdown spot. And I was trying to remember exactly where we saw this in Flight 10, Stephen, but so far it looks like we haven't seen any issue in the aft section of the ship. Recall last time we saw a little bit of breakup near the engine bay, which of course didn't derail the flight from continuing on its nominal flight path, but so far it looks like they aren't even having issues like that.
Yeah, no obvious evidence or signs of anything like that so far, but yeah, it happened early in the reentry process around this time, but I can't remember the exact minute of the flight from Flight 10 when that occurred either.
One part of the heat shield that they're going to be watching very closely is just at the bottom of your screen beneath the second counter, which is one of the catch fittings, which will future version be used to help the ship be recovered by the chopsticks at the launch tower Mechazilla back at Starbase and eventually at towers here in Florida as well. So understanding how well the thermal protection system protects the integrity of those catch fittings is going to be key learnings for SpaceX before they ever try to recapture one of these ships in version 3.
And these views never get old. The plasma building into a sheath around the vehicle, just blanketing the entire ship. We've seen videos of this obviously since the dawn of the space age, the shuttle era. They had videos of this during reentry, but to see it live is just really mind blowing.
Live, and with considering the amount of energy it's going through, not a lot of breakup in the video either. It's quite the feat of engineering. And as SpaceX commentators have noted, there are intentionally missing tiles without additional heating protection behind them. So that's part of the key learnings for SpaceX, is to learn the resilience of the ship upper stage, both in the areas protected by these heat shield tiles as well as those without, and what ship can withstand, and that'll help inform future Starship design. SpaceX commentators noting that ship is entering peak heating. Now 52 minutes into the flight. Starting to get some sunlight down on the Earth below, so a little bit more definition, which is some nice addition. Now below 70 kilometers in altitude, a good view inside the engine bay. Just taking a quick look around. Yeah, it looks like a little bit of SpaceX commentator Dan Hout noting that they changed some of the ways that they dump propellant as ship makes its way back for an aquatic splashdown, which has helped to prevent the issue where some solid propellant built up and took out a chunk of the aft skirt that we saw in Flight 10 that Stephen and I were just talking about. Ship has about 13 minutes before the conclusion of its planned landing timeline in the Indian Ocean. And we'll be watching over these next 10 plus minutes for the banking maneuver that SpaceX says it was planning for the ship's final moments. Coming up on 56 minutes into the flight so far. A little bit of a glow there on one of those catch fittings. Not entirely sure if the catch fittings is one of the areas where SpaceX intentionally removed tiles or not. So far, haven't noticed any aggressive areas of burn through on the flaps that we've seen good views of, which is a good indication that the crunch wrap that Bill Gerstenmaier was talking about that was installed around the tiles over the whole host of the vehicle seemed to be doing its job as intended. Of course, SpaceX's ultimate plan is to create a fully reusable heat shield that will allow for rapid turnaround of Starship. SpaceX noting that they are beginning their bank maneuver. A little more than 58 minutes into the flight.
Yeah, this actually does remind me of the role reversals or S-turns that the space shuttle would do during reentry. I was trying to imagine what they would mean by a dynamic bank maneuver, but this does look familiar.
Yeah, the vehicle passing through max Q, and appreciate the shuttle context, Stephen. Given the 30 years of shuttle heritage, I'm sure there's some learning that was able to be ported over from that for maneuvers like this, as SpaceX is doing more dynamic things, some of which are mirroring what the shuttle used to do. Obviously, very or different flight profile, but still need to have an intact heat shield that protects the ship from reentering, like the shuttle heat shield kept astronauts and the shuttle orbiters mostly safe on the way back in.
We might be seeing a little bit of glow on the aft flap, but nothing approaching what we saw on the last flight. The damage we saw on the last flight. This looks still intact, but just a bit of a glow.
Yeah, I wish they could go to that camera that I think is facing the aft flap near the back end of the ship upper stage, because it does look like there are some embers that are popping off. Oh, and they've got a helicopter, it looks like this time, or a drone in the area.
Should be a great view. And I'll just say the glow may not be a problem, because the shuttle tiles would glow when subjected to heat. So we just because we haven't seen it before doesn't mean it's necessarily a problem.
That's very true. A little more than an hour into the mission, we're coming up on the SpaceX says they're really heavy bank maneuvers, so keep your eyes peeled. We're going to be watching very closely for how Starship maneuvers, which will inform what we should be seeing on future flights of version 3. There should be some really cool shots of it as it makes its splashdown. With this drone in the air, and I imagine a separate drone in the water. GoPro on one of the buoys like we saw last time. And there's the SpaceX buoy view. Bobbing a fair amount there in the Indian Ocean. Now T plus 1 hour, 3 minutes into the mission. Starship now about 25 kilometers in altitude, less than 2,000 kilometers per hour in speed. Roughly 3 minutes to the splashdown. Ship now
Descending
entering.
through.
Oh, go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, just noting they're descending through about 60,000 feet, so approaching the altitude of a typical airliner here in a moment.
And entering into the so-called belly flop position. SpaceX intending to go from 3 to 2 engines as it completes the landing burn here. Engine ignition coming up in about a minute and a half. A lot of movement with this camera because it's positioned on the tip of one of the forward flaps. Final minute before engine ignition. Here's the banking maneuver that we were told would happen around this part of the flight. Coming up to the start of the landing burn. Less than 10 seconds. Three Raptors and a flip. Three to two, and you could there you see just a little bit of ship off the edge of the buoy cam. And a big ol' explosion as Starship hits the Indian Ocean and wraps up this chapter of the Starship program. The final flight of a version 2 ship and a V2 booster. Lots of excitement there with the SpaceX employees. Let's listen into Dan.
What a day. A whole lot more to go through. As you just saw, everybody here at Starbase pretty hyped. Hey, Tyler, out of Hawthorne, how's everybody holding up?
Thank you, Dan. We had a fantastic time watching. It was another exciting Starship flight test in the books, and we hope that you enjoyed those Starlink views too. So congratulations to the team at Starbase and everyone here and around the company. So many employees contribute to the Starship program as we continue to iterate and make progress towards a multi-planetary future. So that wraps it up for us here in Hawthorne. Thank you for tuning in, and back to you guys.
Yeah, what an incredible launch today. We had successful liftoff. Booster completed its objective, successfully splashed down over in the Gulf. Obviously, we saw another amazing Starlink deploy as well from ship.
Yeah, we made it through that re-entry, testing all the different experience. We had missing tiles, gave us quite the light show. We had that Raptor relight 3 for 3. That was ahead of re-entry, of course. And then that awesome splashdown that we just saw, including that dynamic banking maneuver to simulate RTLS when we returned to the launch site. So yeah, we promised maximum excitement, and Starship delivered.
Definitely.
Congrats to all our teammates at SpaceX and to everyone who's supporting the Starship program. And thank you to all our future customers for your support.
We'd also like to thank the fine people of Cameron County, including the residents of its newest city, Starbase, as well as the Coast Guard, the Federal Aviation Administration, the Government of Mexico, and the Australian Space Agency.
Yeah.
And we're going to go ahead and start to wrap things up as we have seen the good splashdown of Ship 38. But before we go, we of course want to thank our friend and space reporting colleague, Stephen Clark, over at Ars Technica. Stephen, your final thoughts on Starship Flight 11, the closing of this chapter, and, you know, just the fact that while they've gotten through this phase in the Starship program, that there's still quite a ways to go for version 3 and some of the big objectives that it has, especially where it concerns the U.S. taxpayer with the Artemis program and its role as the human landing system.
Yes, still a ways to go. I think we'll have to wait a few months before we see Starship version 3 fly from Starbase. In the meantime, we'll see a lot of testing coming up with version 3. We'll see static fires, proof testing, all sorts of things as they activate both Pad B and prepare for Starship version 3 to debut. But a very successful flight today. Version 2 is going out in a blaze of glory. The flight was very successful from start to finish. That was probably the cleanest Starship flight that I've seen so far. I really need to think about that before I put that in words in a story. But yeah, very little sign of any damage to the vehicle. A pinpoint splashdown of Super Heavy and Starship. And yeah, a great flight, a great way to end this generation of Starship after a troubled start.
Yes, indeed. And before we let you go, where can folks keep up with your work over at Ars Technica?
Yeah, just go to arstechnica.com, arstechnica.com, and follow the space coverage from myself and my colleague, of course, Eric Berger there at Ars Technica. And you can follow me on X at Stephen Clark 1.
And if you're not following Stephen, you absolutely should. Thank you so much again, Stephen, for joining us with this launch coverage, and we look forward to bringing you back when version 3 is getting ready to fly. Hopefully we'll both be down at Starbase for that one.
I hope so. Looking forward to it.
Alrighty. Take care, buddy. And before we go ahead and let you all go, just want to bring in a quick video snippet shot by our Adam Bernstein, if we can. It's the tracking camera view that he was able to capture as ship passed south of Florida over the area of the Caribbean, releasing some of that propellant as it continued on at the beginning of its journey towards, as we just saw, a successful splashdown in the Indian Ocean, closing this chapter in the Starship saga. Some really beautiful views here, and we'll of course be sharing these on our social media as well, so you can go back and check them out at your leisure. As a reminder, though, the launch excitement is just taking a brief 22 roughly minute pause before we go ahead and start our coverage of the Kuiper launch from here in Florida at Pad 40. So we're going to sign off for now. Want to thank our team for a stellar job covering Starship Flight 11. Thanks to our friend P. Carsons with Max Q Productions down in Starbase at South Padre Island. To our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs here in Florida, as well as Adam Bernstein for the tracking views. Thanks to our Spaceflight Now editor Stephen Young for running the technical operations of the broadcast, alongside photographer John Pisani. Quick thank you to Gunnar S. for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships, to United Nations Space Command for being a member with us now for 26 months, saying thanks again to Spaceflight Now team for the amazing coverage. And a big thanks to Mitchell Wilbur, one of our channel members, for a very generous $50 super chat. Thank you so much, Mitchell. Really appreciate the support at that level. Who says, you guys are the best. Great job, Will and the mods. And yes, a big thank you to our moderators for this stream, to Jeff Hansen and Rick Donner. Really appreciate the both of you for helping us out in the chat, and to channel member Cumulus Granatus for helping to answer folks' questions in the chat as well. As a reminder, we're hopping over to our coverage of Kuiper Falcon 3, the final flight of Kuiper satellites on board a Falcon 9 rocket, as currently booked. Liftoff is 9:58 p.m. Our coverage starts in 20 minutes, so we got to go and get ready for that. Want to thank all of you for your time and attention. We'll see you very shortly for our live coverage of this Falcon 9 rocket. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, folks, very soon. And until then, bye-bye.